after more than 3 weeks of dysfunction and chaos on Capitol Hill. The House finally has a new speaker this morning. House lawmakers elected Congressman Mike Johnson of Louisiana as the 56th Speaker of the House. He's a conservative ally of former President Donald Trump and a low-ranking member of the GOP leadership team. After 22 days of disarray, Republican House members demonstrated remarkable unity, with all 220 voting for Johnson. Shortly after the vote, the new speaker made this pledge.
And I want to make this commitment to you, to my colleagues here and on the other side of the aisle as well. My office is going to be known for trust and transparency and accountability, for good stewardship of the people's treasure, for the honesty and integrity that is incumbent upon us, all of us, here in the People's House.
Speaker Johnson will immediately have to work within his party and with the Biden White House to figure out how to fund the government before money runs out on November 17th and deliver critical aid packages to Ukraine and Israel. As for Speaker Johnson himself, he is arguably the most ideological conservative person to serve as Speaker since Newt Gingrich in the 1990s. Johnson is an outspoken opponent of abortion and LGBTQ rights. The 51-year-old also played an instrumental role in the GOP's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. He led the amicus brief signed by 100 Republicans backing a Texas lawsuit seeking to invalidate the 2020 election results in 4 swing states won by President Biden. The New York Times called Johnson, quote, the most important architect of the Electoral College objections. Ahead of yesterday's vote, Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar of California called out Johnson for his previous efforts to overturn the 2020 election results.
This has been about one thing. This has been about who can appease Donald Trump. House Republicans have put their names behind someone who has been called the most important architect of the Electoral College objections. He's spearheaded. That's fair. That's fair. We know how you feel. Yeah, you've made that clear.
Damn right, someone in the chamber yells. Meanwhile, former President Trump congratulated the new speaker by posting on social media, quote, MAGA Mike Johnson, adding that Johnson will be, quote, a great speaker. Let's bring in the White House editor for Politico, Sam Stein, and congressional investigations reporter for the Washington Post, Jackie Alameda, and founder of the conservative website, The Bulwark, Charlie Sykes. And Willie, this is going to be interesting. This election denier as Speaker of the House.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Sykes, just look at who celebrated the loudest yesterday. It was Donald Trump. It was Matt Gaetz. It was somehow they got moderates, the New York moderates who've been holding some of the power here. Mike Lawler, for example, they all got on board with Mike Johnson. And the truth is, as someone put it to me yesterday, he's Jim Jordan with a jacket and a better haircut, which is to say he has full-throatedly supported the effort to overturn the 2020 election, obviously very conservative on issues like abortion, LGBTQ rights. Yes. What's your assessment of where the party landed here?
No question who the biggest winners are here. Matt Gaetz may be loathed by his colleagues, but he got his way, right? He blew it up. He managed to torpedo Kevin McCarthy, to block Steve Scalise, to shiv Tom Emmer, and eventually did get his own candidate. Adam Kinzinger describes him, Mike Johnson, as Jim Jordan in drag. So there's no question about it. I mean, this is a full MAGA. This is a full MAGA speaker. You know, to describe him as one of the chief architects of the Electoral College objections actually understates Mike Johnson's role. I mean, Mike Johnson is a full-throated believer in Kraken-level conspiracy theories about Dominion, about Hugo Chavez. If he had gotten his way, tens of millions of votes would have been thrown out. He may be a personable individual, but he is a pure ideologue. But I think it is extraordinary as we look back on all of this chaos that Matt Gaetz and a handful of other members of the caucus, of the people that John McCain called the wacko birds, John Boehner called them legislative terrorists, Ben Wittes calls them the crazed slavering jackal caucus. Ultimately, they got their way,
Yeah.
and all of the normies caved in. For a brief 5 minutes, it looked like the moderates were going to hold the line, but ultimately the squishes did what squishes always do, and the fact that it was unanimous is also extraordinary.
And that was my question to you, Jackie Alamany. What happened here? What changed when you had people like Ken Buck and others saying, I will not support somebody who is an election denier?
Exactly.
Full stop.
Yeah.
And then yesterday, he got the votes he needed.
It was a really remarkable turn of events to see someone with perhaps the lowest name ID in all of American history become speaker in a matter of less than 24 hours, actually, with a full support of his conference. I think that Johnson benefited from a number of things, primarily the fact that he has no national profile. Even his colleagues didn't have time to properly vet him, as one lawmaker told me. He didn't have time to go through all of his votes overnight in that period from Tuesday night when Tom Emmer stormed out of the House GOP conference, dropping out as speaker, and when Mike Johnson then became the speaker designate to votes the next morning. He also benefited from fatigue, I think, if lawmakers are being honest. When I spoke with Ken Buck yesterday, he said that he supported Mike Johnson. He tried to draw a distinction between his opposition to Jim Jordan and Mike Johnson, making this argument that Jordan was actively involved in encouraging the rioters to storm the U.S. Capitol. He was in the White House, in touch with Trump in these efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election, and that Mike Johnson was involved in the lawyerly aspects of the fight, and therefore it wasn't as harmful. But when I asked Buck why he didn't ask Johnson in that House GOP conference meeting, as he had with other candidates, whether he was opposed, whether he still believed the 2020 election was stolen, Buck simply said it was a really long day. There were 12 other things going on, and he just didn't get to the question, but he was hopeful that Johnson would answer it appropriately. I asked Johnson right after he gave his press conference, his first press conference as House GOP Speaker, whether or not he believed the 2020 election was stolen, and he simply said that his position was well known and that he wasn't going to be talking about issues yesterday.
Wow. So Sam Stein, big picture. How does Mitch McConnell work with him? What do you see in terms of actual government running, policy being created, laws passing? What do you see coming in the future, given his extreme stances and how he works with other Republicans who perhaps don't carry those same beliefs?
It's a great question. There's a couple things that have to come to a head, right? One is funding the government. We have a matter of weeks until the current resolution runs out. They got to get it funded, and you have to wonder if he being Johnson, gets a little bit of runway to handle that. The other is this supplemental foreign aid package that was introduced, $106 billion, Ukraine, Israel, border aid, humanitarian aid, all that's going to be packaged together. Does he get any leeway to push that forward? And if so, maybe they can get it done, but it gets pared back. Mitch McConnell has to figure out how much pressure he puts on him as well. It's a great unknown. And keep in mind, there's no template by which we can really judge Mike Johnson here. He's never done this before. His legislative record is very sparse. He's only been a 4-term member of Congress. He doesn't have the leadership experience that anyone who also ran for the post has. So this is all sort of on-the-fly experimental governance. He's second in line for the presidency, and people are Googling him right now to figure out what's going on. So I'm just completely uncertain, as everyone else is, about how these next couple weeks go. But there are several major things that do have to happen.
Charlie, the idea that Mike Johnson's colleagues, Republican colleagues, the moderates, didn't have time to vet him properly because this was moving so quickly doesn't pass the laugh test, because it wasn't moving quickly, number one. And number two, all you have to do is Google him to find that he was one of the architects and the leaders of the effort to attempt, anyway, to overturn the 2020 election that was slapped down by the Supreme Court ultimately with that amicus brief in the Texas lawsuit. Right. But speak to the Donald Trump of it all here. I mean, for all the talk of his perhaps waning influence, he was able to take out Emmer when he wanted to, when he decided that he wasn't the right guy because he wasn't a strong enough supporter. And at the end of the day, he looked at Mike Johnson, did Donald Trump, said, oh, he did all that stuff on my behalf around the 2020 election. Congress, he's the guy.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, Donald, in case there was any doubt that Donald Trump is sitting in a courtroom in New York, but he is still the apex predator of the Republican Party. Tom Emmer is not the speaker because he refused to go along with Donald Trump's coup attempts. Mike Johnson, this fifth string speaker that nobody really knows anything about, is in fact second in line to the presidency because of the role he played in trying to get Donald Trump to overthrow the elections. I mean, so this is not rocket science. This is now a full MAGA house, and whether it was exhaustion or a lack of courage or a lack of imagination, you had the entire Republican Party basically now lining up behind a super uber Trumpy speaker, which seems to be the story of the last 7 years, isn't it? It seems to be the story of 2023. It seems to be the story of 2024.
The Bulwark's Charlie Sykes, Politico Sam Stein, and the Washington Post Jackie Alamany, thank you all. Of course, major news out of Washington. We have an election denier as Speaker of the House. We're all